Hi everyone, Meteorologist Bill Rentschler in the 1011 Now streaming studio, joined by Meteorologist Carmelo Lattuca for a new segment that we're going to be hopefully bringing you. Try and do this about once a week, different topics every week.
Absolutely.
And Carmelo, we're excited today to again kind of start this off. And we're talking about tornadoes today because basically anyone in Nebraska knows, this year it's been kind of busy.
It has been above average, to say the least. That might be a little bit of an underestimate.
So we'll do kind of a deep dive into what tornadoes are, sort of a little bit of the climatology, how they form, and we'll look at some of the numbers as to kind of what we've seen, again, so far this year. Also have... obviously, a ton of video from what we've seen so far this year. Again, we just mentioned it, but we'll look at it in a second, Carmelo. But in Nebraska, we average the 30-year average for tornadoes is 48 every year.
48,
and we've doubled that so far this year. I believe the last count. And I believe this was before there maybe was a tornado out in Broken Bow last week. I believe it was 92 tornadoes so far this year in Nebraska.
I mean, I understand the majority of severe weather season is over. You don't want to say it's completely over yet. I know we're finally getting into some hot weather, and that kind of kills the severe weather. But I mean, things happen in the fall, so we have some time to go before we're done counting those numbers for sure.
And for us as meteorologists, again, it's always kind of a mixed bag of emotions when it comes to severe weather and tornadoes. Obviously we got into this field.
I did for sure.
For a reason, and that's because we're interested by it. And again, the severe weather is kind of what draws a lot of people in. And so, I enjoyed tornadoes probably a lot more in college than I do now.
Okay.
We obviously never want to see anyone get hurt. We never want to see any of the destruction that comes along with it. But that being said, again, they're really incredible parts of Mother Nature, and just really, can be sort of awe-inspiring, and it kind of just reminds you that Mother Nature is this sort of big, beautiful, and sometimes destructive thing that just is going to do what it wants to do.
Oh, absolutely, and with how much fascination it draws in, there's still so much we kind of don't know about certain processes and how things happen, but I definitely think that's why I got into the business, the fascination with severe weather. But as you said, we don't want anything ever to happen to anybody. But, I mean, I just cannot believe how active this season has been. I think we've had 2 confirmed tornadoes in Lancaster County alone.
Yeah. I think we've had even more than that. We've had quite a few. Like we said, over 90 so far this year in the state of Nebraska.
In the state, yes.
When we average, the 30-year average being around 48. So again, we've been looking at the video footage we've been seeing there. Is again just the collection. Obviously, the big day, at least locally here, again was Arbor Day, April 26th.
Right.
We had the tornado in Northeast Lincoln. Again, hit the Garner Industries building, and again eventually moved up towards the Waverly area. Eventually, then hitting Blair and Elkhorn and Bennington and those areas up near Omaha. And again, just some incredible footage that came out of that day. And again, if you still drive down Highway 6, you can still see the Garner Industries building there. You can still see the mangled trees and everything that goes with it. And so, but there's been plenty of them across the state. It hasn't just been us, and it hasn't just been us in Nebraska. It's been a lot of the country has seen a very busy severe weather season and a very busy tornado season.
And we're going to take a look at the yearly counts nationwide, correct, of how many tornadoes we've had, and see how that compares to the record number overall. And you might be surprised by the number. Okay,
and I'm getting word that Bailey is telling us that our audio is just a little bit laggy, and I think my computer is just a little bit angry. So I'm going to delete some stuff out of here, and hopefully that will make it be less angry. And so... Okay, I've deleted some things, so hopefully things are a little less angry with me now. But we'll go ahead, and Bailey will check that out for us. And while she's checking that out for us, we'll kind of jump in. What is a tornado? And so, again, most people in Nebraska, most people around here locally are pretty weather savvy.
Yes.
But there's still some questions, and sometimes people just don't know.
Absolutely. No, we should definitely talk about it, because I think a lot of people will see something start to come down from the cloud, and they'll automatically say it's a tornado, and it might not be a tornado, or if it doesn't reach the base and it is one, people say it isn't one. So You just want to, state for the record that violently rotating column of air, so basically the cloud rotating up above, making its way down to the surface, and once you start to see debris being picked up, that's when we can confirm 100% that's a tornado.
Yep, and so that circulation has to reach all the way down to the ground. If it is not all the way down to the ground, that's what we would call a funnel.
Correct.
And so an important distinction there. And a lot of times people will send us pictures, and, it's like, well, that looks like what it might be a tornado, but because it's a still picture,
right,
you can't see. Sometimes, there's hills, and so you can't actually see where that tornado could potentially be touching down to the ground. So it's always really hard. The interesting story that I think goes back with this is, you go back to Arbor Day, and John Grinvalds, our reporter, was the one out in the weather shield,
yes, he was,
tracking the tornado. And afterwards he came back, he said, I've thought I've seen like rotation in clouds before, but after seeing what actually that tornado looks like and actually seeing that rotation, there's a big difference. So a lot of people think that they see, maybe a funnel cloud or something rotating. There's a lot of air moving in thunderstorms, and so there's a pretty big distinction though between a rotating funnel cloud and what we would call a scud cloud.
Absolutely. I mean, you can read about these things, you can watch them on TV, you can have seen them from somewhere else on a video perhaps, but then to see it in person, it really does make all the difference.
Mm-hmm. And so in Nebraska, if you look at sort of tornadoes and when we generally see them, and Carmelo, you just mentioned this, but we're getting into July, and thankfully it's late July now.
Yes.
We're really coming on the downhill of our severe weather season. But this is tornadoes. This is observed tornadoes. This is data collected by the National Weather Service. But this is from 1950 through 2022 for the entire state of Nebraska. And so you can see 4 big months there: April, May, June, and July. 85% of our tornadoes occur in those 4 months.
Absolutely. I mean, that's when we have, it starts to get hot. We know it's the spring and summer. It starts to get more humid. We're pulling in Gulf moisture, colliding with colder air. Start to get some of that rotation. Finally, though, we're seeing this big high pressure this week, Bill. I mean, we're talking about temperatures. I just saw Brad's 7-day forecast, and 100 degrees next week is about forecasted. So you start to get that heat ridge building in that kind of kills the severe weather. It pushes it farther to the north, and we'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. But yes, we are on the downward trend, which is, I think, a very good thing. I think most people will be happy to hear that.
But you'll notice we have had tornadoes in all 12 months of the year.
We have.
Some of them, again, it's not very many, just 6 in January, only 2 in February. But again, those are months that, whenever we're talking in schools, I always tell the kids, you guys are worried about whether you're going to have a snow day or not or something like that. But we have seen severe weather in those months, and there have been tornadoes in those months. Most recently, in December of 2021.
Yes. See how little jumps there from 7 to 33.
Yeah, we had 27 tornadoes in one day on December 15th, 2021.
We did. I remember I was taking my final for one of my meteorology classes, and we were all rushing to get out of there because we had our final in the morning, and I believe LPS closed schools the day before, and we knew it was going to be a windy day. We had temperatures 70s and 80s, and I mean that's not common for December by any means.
No.
And we had, I think you could call it an outbreak. I mean, I think there was a
derecho.
It
was a derecho, and moved across the state. And again, when the weather center, we said, hey, there's a chance for thunderstorms, maybe some severe weather, which was just unusual. But then to have 27 tornadoes in one day across the state, it was a busy day.
Yeah, talk about uncommon.
Yeah, so if you take those same tornadoes by month and you break them down by time of day, this is the time of day that these tornadoes happen. And again, obviously in Nebraska, most of our severe weather happens afternoon, evening. We do still have some that happens during the overnight hours, but overnight tornadoes are much less common.
Yes.
Thankfully, because
those
are the most dangerous kinds of tornadoes. Again, it's dark, people are asleep, hard to get them that information. And the example I always really like to use, again, when we're talking to the kids at the school visits, I always ask them if they've ever made a box of Kraft macaroni and cheese. And because the first thing you have to do is you have to boil the water. And so the atmosphere in the morning is kind of like when you just put that pot of water on the stove. It's not really doing anything yet, but in the afternoon, that's kind of when you have a little, that rolling boil in that pot of water, because we need the heating of the day to drive our severe weather.
Yeah, and I mean, in the evening hours, use the same analogy, that water's still hot. You could still get something happening. It takes a while for things to kind of calm down. And, I mean, those percentages, look, between midnight and about 8 a.m., they're very low, but they're not zero. So things do happen, and you almost have to be weather aware 24 hours a day. Even if you are sleeping, have those ways to get the notifications for warnings.
Multiple ways to get those notifications. So if you break it down, this is the 30-year average from 1994 to 2023, average number of tornadoes per state. And we mentioned it earlier, but Nebraska averages 48 tornadoes every year. But it's an interesting, again, visual depiction here. Again, I think most people have probably heard the phrase Tornado Alley.
Yes.
And again, it's just that middle part of the country from Texas up to the Dakotas. And again, it's not just in the United States, but globally. This is where we have the most tornadoes.
Yeah, we're in a really interesting setup where we get cold air moving in from the north and west. The Gulf of Mexico really helps us get that moisture from the south and east, and then they just clash in the center of the country. And I think there's a big misconception that, Oklahoma, everyone growing up, Oklahoma has the most tornadoes. I mean, look at the difference between Oklahoma and Texas, and I think a lot of that has to do with the land size, much bigger state, but you can see west of the Rocky Mountains, east of the Appalachian Mountains, those numbers really start to go down, but they're also going up into the deep south, and people say that Tornado Alley is shifting, or there's another Tornado Alley developing.
Dixie Alley,
so... And we'll see that when we play out the months of the year in terms of when the tornadoes happen. But, the center of the country for sure has the most tornadoes.
It's like you mentioned it. This is, again, basically a breakdown of that same map, but looking at it by each specific month. So, again, you can see in January, again, in Nebraska, it's generally cold, snowy. We're not worried about severe weather. But like you mentioned, it's not necessarily our severe weather season, but if you go kind of Texas into the southeast, they are still dealing with severe weather during that time of year.
Absolutely.
And so they average, a handful. Texas, again, being the most, probably about 5 or 6 in the month of January. Same there in Mississippi, but you can see all those Gulf states still dealing with severe weather in January and February. Again, it kind of goes down a little bit as we get into really the tail end of winter there. But again, it's kind of the Gulf states. They do still average a couple. And then in March, things start to kind of tick back up again. You can see Texas begins to see that pick up again into the deep south, but also into parts of the central plains in Nebraska, starting at least to get a little bit warmer out. We're probably lacking still in the moisture in that department. But then again, like the graph just a couple graphics ago, as you get into April, things really begin to ramp up. May and June for Nebraska, again, those are our two really big months. We average more than 10 tornadoes across the state during those 2 months. You can see June, it extends all the way into the northern plains. And then in July, we start to tamp things down a little bit because this is kind of the time far northern plains in southern Canada that they kind of see their severe weather season peak.
Yeah, severe weather has to usually ride around the high pressure system. So if we have high pressure in Nebraska, we have a clockwise circulation, it has to go around it. So the Dakotas, look at Minnesota and North Dakota, this is when they start to peak their severe weather season. So those are where the tornado watches are most common. Minnesota, as we get into the month of August, still probably one of our higher months. Things could still happen here, but they're less common. And then as we get into the fall, as we were talking about Dixie Alley, things into the southeast start to really develop, and those months start to push their numbers up just a little bit as our numbers here in Nebraska go down.
And so there's October, and again in November we see that transition as it kind of slides back to the south. And one of the reasons, Carmelo, again, it kind of, we see that from south to north and then back from north to south, is through the year the jet stream, which is again critical in providing us wind shear and there's strong winds aloft, which can provide some energy for severe weather. It kind of starts down to our south, but then through the year it migrates northward, and then eventually kind of migrates back to the south. Absolutely,
it does, and it is crazy how things can happen, isn't it? And how many tornadoes we've had this year, just nationwide, not even in the state alone, but nationwide. I think we're up to, what is it, 1482?
1,482 preliminary reports.
Right.
Which again, that's through yesterday's date, which the normal, the average is about 1,100
at this point in the year.
At this point in the year. And so we are about 400 tornadoes above that. So you can see again, once you hit kind of late April, the red line
started to separate.
really started to just shoot up. So again, we mentioned it earlier, but it's been a very active year, just not in Nebraska, but across much of the country when it comes to severe weather and when it comes to tornadoes. So 1,482 preliminary tornadoes so far this year, Carmelo. If you look at the entire year, the yearly record is 1,842.
I think we have a good chance of beating that.
I think we're going to be close. And that was set back in 2004. When you're talking just the average since 1950, it's about 980. So we're about 600 plus
Yes.
over what we would see for the entire year, and we're sitting here today on July 25th.
Can we go back to that graphic we just had?
Yes,
The
we can.
preliminary. So look at that yearly total. Let's go to the end of December for the average number of preliminary reports, and it's just over 1,400. So even if we don't break the record, at this point, we're so
if
far
we
above
didn't
for
see
the right.
another tornado for the entire rest
the
of the
rest
year.
of the year, we're already still well above the preliminary report. So either way, I mean, break that record or not, I don't think people need to see that. I don't think people want to see it. I think at this point it's meteorological fascination, and can we break this record? Could we hit a higher number than that? But regardless, I mean, it has just been an incredible year for severe weather.
It has been. And so again, there's the whole entire year. Again, if you look at just the last 20 years, it's been pretty high. The last 20 years, I mean, if you ranked it, the top 10.
Yes.
This year is 6th, and it's late July. But over the last 20 years or so, probably half of those years are in the last 10 to 15 years.
Right.
So,
and I mean, I think reporting has gotten a little bit better.
Has gotten better. Radar technology's gotten better.
Yes.
And a lot of times there used to be a tornado that happened in the middle of an open field, and
it doesn't even get rated. And we'll talk about the ratings in just a little bit.
Well, but all it takes now is someone just snap a picture with their phone,
Yeah.
tweets it at the whatever weather office, and there's another tornado.
I mean, that wasn't happening 30, 40 years ago.
It was not. It was not. So we've talked about the number of tornadoes, but how do tornadoes actually form?
Very, very important to know the ingredients that come together.
And so for just severe weather,
Yes.
we like to use the acronym SLIM.
Yes.
So shear, lift, instability, moisture. And again, to see tornadoes, we really need all 4 of those things. Again, the shear being the twisting and turning of the winds.
Yep.
The lift, obviously, being the instability.
Like a cold front.
Cold front, something to force the air upward to get some thunderstorms to develop, things like that. Instability, again, is that just high amount of energy in the atmosphere.
Yeah, so like surface heating, as the ground heats, it becomes unstable, so that's a really good one. That's why we say on cloudy days, maybe you don't have to worry as much about severe weather, and people are thinking, oh, it's a sunny day, I don't have to worry. That's usually when we're the most concerned back in the weather center. And I think everybody knows the moisture ingredient. When it's humid and it's hot out there, a little bit of cause for concern on certain days.
And so when you get 3 out of the 4 or 2 out of the 4, you
Yes.
can still have severe weather, you can still have tornadoes, but it's just
But you probably need all 4 when you need at least tornadoes to form.
And so what we see a lot of times is we have, say, in Nebraska, let's say, on those big severe weather days, we're probably going to have a southerly or southeasterly wind at the surface. And that's going to be pulling moisture northward. But what happens when you kind of go aloft is those winds are changing direction. They might be more out of the west or the southwest, and they're much stronger. And so you have this different twisting and turning of the winds as you go from the ground up into the atmosphere. And that does something, Carmelo. Can you tell everyone what that does?
It does. And real quick, I just want to say, what we learned in school was shear had 2 definitions. You could have speed shear, so you need the winds to increase with height, and you can see that in this graphic. They're moving a little bit slower at the surface than they are up above. So when we say stronger, we mean in one sense. We need them to be increasing with speed. And then we say directional shear, so we need them to turn with height as well. So I think we have seen it on our graphics. We'll have the winds going one way, and then as you go up, they start to shift in direction, and that helps the air to rotate upward. And what we have is called an updraft. So we have that rotating column of air, because the winds are changing as they move on with height, increasing with speed. That's we need. So those 2 things. As that progresses throughout the day, you have the thunderstorm updraft. So if you ever hear us talk about hail, when water evaporates, hail gets to form in the cloud, starts to fall down. If the updraft speed is stronger than the weight of the hail's going to get pushed back up. It's going to become larger. It's going to freeze with more water. So that's when you start to see those big cumulonimbus clouds. You get the anvil, so it kind of flattens out up top. And as the updraft increases with speed, though, we start to see that rotating column of air start to shift from a horizontal direction into more of a vertical direction. And this is when it starts to get a little more interesting, at least back here in the weather center and out in the environment if you're storm chasing, for example. And we start to see, I believe we have the mesocyclone or the wall cloud that gets to form next.
Well, and this is the difference between what we would call a supercell thunderstorm and just your sort of garden variety regular thunderstorm. The supercell thunderstorm has this massive, huge,
Absolutely,
rotating updraft, and a lot of times it's what gives sort of these thunderstorms the striations that we see.
Yes.
And some of the amazing structure that we see in these thunderstorms is thanks in part to this giant rotating updraft. And so then as you go further, eventually you get this wall cloud that develops, and you have this huge, massive, rotating thunderstorm, and eventually that circulation becomes much more tight, much more localized, and that's when you start to see that rotation eventually come from the base of the thunderstorm down towards the cloud. And then, like we said at the very beginning, once it actually reaches the ground, that's when we would call it a tornado.
Yes, so the wall cloud, lowering of the base of the storm, usually a good indicator. Not always, but usually we can say there's likely to be a tornado warning issued with that, because when you start to see that lowering, storm isn't intensifying. And as you just said, when that cloud makes its way down to the ground, we do call it a tornado. And if it's not all the way at the ground, no debris being picked up, we call it a funnel cloud.
And so with supercell versus just a non-supercell, 99% of our tornadoes come from
supercells.
Supercell thunderstorms. But there are some just the garden variety thunderstorms that do produce tornadoes, but we call them something else. We call them land spouts.
And they're usually much weaker.
And
don't last as long.
And they're really hard for us to detect.
Yes.
Because the rotation with a land spout versus a tornado is so much lower in the atmosphere. The radars have a really hard time seeing them, because as that radar beam goes out, it also goes
increases
up
with height. Yes.
And so a lot of times, say for the radar for us in Lincoln, it's located in a valley, but by the time that radar beam actually reaches us in Lincoln, it's already several thousand feet off the ground. So if there's a thunderstorm, it's only 2,000 feet off the ground, and there's some rotation in there, that radar's not necessarily going to see it.
This is why radar is not the
end all
be all answer. Thank you. That's exactly what I was thinking. Public reports are still, and I don't see a time when they're not going to be ever not important. We need the public to. We don't want them obviously out and about when this is happening, but if they happen to be and they see something, call local law enforcement, call the National Weather Service. Helps us do our jobs a little bit better as well. But yes, land spouts usually not as strong, not long lasting. And I think even it was either this past weekend or last week, there were storms in northeastern Nebraska, and we had cold core funnels. So it's just a term we use when it's not a severe weather setup, but we have these land spouts. And I think there were a few reports of funnel clouds. So, and I don't think I saw a single tornado warning. So
that's a whole other topic for a whole other weather academy, is cold air funnels and things like that. We won't get too far into that. But
just to say that public reports are very important.
Yes. So jumping into this is always a fan.
We use this graphic for the
visits.
Yes.
And I have to again give meteorologist Brad Panovich, who works in Charlotte, North Carolina, credit for this graphic. He's the one who came up with it several years ago, and meteorologists everywhere latched onto it. And that's because everyone likes cupcakes. A cupcake watch versus a cupcake warning, when we think of it in terms of severe weather. And again, most people in Nebraska are pretty weather savvy and understand, the difference between a watch and a warning. But not everyone does. Sometimes kids don't. And again, I always use the example when we're talking at the schools. I bet your teacher at one point in time has said, like, hey, watch out. This is your last warning.
Yes.
And so it's like, hey, what's worse? What do we need to be concerned about? And so for the watch, Carmelo and I wanted to make some cupcakes.
We have all the ingredients out. We got our eggs. We got our flour, our frosting. It's all ready to go. We don't have the cupcake made.
But there's a good chance they're going to happen.
I mean, with all the ingredients there, I'm making a cupcake.
But when we actually put all the ingredients together and we pulled the tray out of the oven, we put the frosting on.
Yes.
We're holding a cupcake. That's the cupcake warning.
That is the warning, most definitely.
So same thing with severe weather. Again, when we see a tornado watch, tornado warning, something like that, the watch just means, hey, all the ingredients are there. And again, when we're in Nebraska, a lot of times it's a tornado watch that covers most of central and eastern Nebraska.
Yeah.
And so it's that area that we think is going to have the best conditions that could lead to severe weather, could lead to tornadoes. Not everyone is necessarily going to see it. So if you set out a tray of a dozen cupcakes at a party and there's 24 people there, not everyone is probably going to get a cupcake.
Right.
And when that warning is issued, that's when we think a tornado is potentially imminent or is occurring. And so when that tornado warning is issued, that's when we want you to take action.
And then we have an even more rare warning. We call it tornado emergency. I mean, this is something that does not happen every day. It does not even happen every season. You might not even see this for multiple seasons. But this is a tornado, long-lasting, on the ground, causes a significant amount of damage, because you start to see a difference in the wording of what the National Weather Service will say.
And we did see this on Arbor Day.
We did see this on Arbor Day.
We did see this on Arbor Day when we had those storms moving, especially as they were moving towards kind of the Omaha metro into Elkhorn area. That they knew there was a big tornado on the ground,
right?
And it was moving into a heavily populated area. Most of Nebraska, and most of really a lot of places, it's rural.
It is.
It's not necessarily neighborhoods and things like that. And so we'll see the tornado emergencies if there is a tornado moving into a city or into a densely populated area.
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen them in, population areas that aren't, as large as Lincoln or Omaha. I think I saw one. It was either this season or last season out in Scottsbluff, and it was just a very slow moving, so people had time to see it without, being in too much danger. But, it's usually, some of the wording is destruction is imminent or is very likely, within that warning time, and that warning time is usually 15 to 30 to 45 minutes. So very scary stuff. So that's when you have to take it even more seriously than you would normally do.
And so again, what comes with tornadoes is the enhanced Fujita scale. Again,
Yes.
I think probably most people in Nebraska have heard of that before. But when the Weather Service thinks there's a tornado that has happened, or when they know the tornado has happened, they send out survey teams to assess the damage. And the tornado rating is given on the damage that is done by that tornado.
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of people that think that we rate it based off the size, based off the wind speed. Sometimes we don't even know the wind speed until we know by the damage we can estimate it. Sometimes our raters can tell us that, sometimes they cannot, depending on where the storm is. So we have this rating system that goes through the damage, and we can go through the damage right now and see some of the scale. So as this graphic plays along, we have EF0. It's our weakest tornado, probably the most common tornado, if not an EF1. But we're talking about shingles being ripped off the roof, tree branches likely being pulled off the trees, broken down. Could see most likely power outages, especially if it goes close to those power lines. Then things start to get a little bit more intense.
So EF1, you're talking wind speeds 86 to 110 miles an hour. That's when you're talking power lines being knocked over or torn down, small trees that are being uprooted. It's talking about a little bit more significant damage to potentially homes, outbuildings, things like that. And so EF0 and EF1 are what we would call weak tornadoes. Strong tornadoes would be EF2, EF3. So EF2, you're talking 111 to 135 miles an hour. Again, you're talking roofs coming off, larger trees uprooted. You're talking about cars now potentially starting to be flipped around and moved around. EF3, and this is what we saw in Northeast Lincoln. This was the Garner Industries tornado. It was rated an EF3. The tornadoes that moved through Elkhorn, Blair, Bennington, there was a lot of stuff on social media about the destruction. The damage was horrible, and people were saying this was an EF5, and no, it was an EF3, and they estimated
a strong EF3.
Yeah, strong EF3. Its estimated max wind was 165 miles an hour. So
and what's the range on the 3 again?
It's 136 to 165.
So I mean, it's basically as close as a 4 as you could possibly get.
And so again, if you look at kind of what the graphic is here, and if you went back and you looked at some of the drone footage from up in the Omaha area, again, it kind of looked like this. You have kind of top floors of homes that are basically destroyed. You have trees that are debarked. You have vehicles completely displaced. But if you go to EF3 to EF4, the destruction, it gets even worse, as bad as that is. EF4, you're talking winds up to 200 miles an hour. And so most of the homes are just completely leveled. There's not much left standing there. You have grass and landscaping that's completely stripped. And then EF5, you're talking winds of over 200 miles an hour. Basically, all you have left is the concrete foundation of
And even that starts to get ripped up.
And even that does start to get ripped up.
I think this is when I've seen some video of, when you're in the parking lot and it has the, not the curb,
the little concrete barrier.
Yeah, that where to park your car at.
Yeah.
I mean, those have started to get ripped up at this wind speed. I mean, and those are heavy in their own, and they're drilled into the ground. And I mean, just to imagine concrete being ripped from the ground. I mean, you're talking about as strong as it possibly can get.
And so, thankfully, EF4s, EF5s, pretty rare.
Although they are the deadliest, they do account for the least amount of tornadoes. So that is the very good news that we can share.
So just 2% of all tornadoes, less than 2% of all tornadoes, are in that EF4 to EF5 range. But like you mentioned, they do account for 2/3 of all tornado-related fatalities.
Yes.
So most of the tornadoes we see are that EF0, EF1. I'd also throw in EFU, which is an EF unknown. We've seen a lot of those so far this year. Again, that is basically if there's a tornado that happens in the middle of a big open field and it doesn't do any damage. It's our favorite kind of tornado, Carmelo.
Absolutely.
That's the one we like to see. But if it doesn't do any damage,
then we can't know what the rating is.
Yeah. because that survey team that goes out, they have damage indicators they look for, and so if they can't see the damage indicators, they can't give it a rating.
Bill, do you know if there's been an EF5 this year?
I do not believe there has been
No,
an
I don't
EF5
think so either.
this year. And I believe there's only been, I want to say 3 or 4
In the last few years?
EF4s
okay.
so far this year. And if you look at, and I'll punch it up right here, but this is, let's see here.
As Bill's punching up, I want to say that, they're
This
very...
is
go ahead.
a map. Sorry, Carmelo.
No, you're fine.
This is a map of all EF3, EF4, and EF5 tornadoes in the state of Nebraska, and this is 1950 to 2023. So it doesn't have this year's stuff on it.
Right.
But you'll notice there's one pink line in here, and I'll zoom in on it a little bit, because that is the only F5 tornado that has ever hit the state of Nebraska. It's this one right here.
Pretty good distance.
It was on the ground for a while, and it was 1965, I believe. Started near Hastings,
Okay.
traveled to the north and east, and then lifted just to this kind of south and southeast of the Columbus area. So again, only one in the state of Nebraska.
No, and I mean, I think that's as many as we want to see in the state of Nebraska.
Yeah.
But yes, they're very rare. I mean, as you said, account for less than 2%, and that was 4 and 5. So I think EF5 account for less than 1% of all tornadoes, if I remember correctly. And they really do depend on the time of year as well. As we said, things start to taper down in July and August, but that's the total number of tornadoes. I think there's only ever been one tornado of an EF5 rating ever in the month of August. So that means there's likely not any in the fall months or in the early winter months. There are very spring and early summer heavy setup of tornadoes, and it's just incredible that there's even been one in the state of Nebraska. I cannot even imagine that. But that's still a sizable amount of tornadoes. I know this covers a very large period, but this is just 3, 4, and 5. Imagine if we had 0, 1, and 2 on top of this map.
Well, I can put 0, 1.
Oh my God!
And
Look
2.
at that. I'm assuming all the blue dots are zeros.
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
So there's a lot.
Yeah.
There is a lot.
We are in Tornado Alley, aren't we, Bill?
And so a couple of them on here just to point out, and I think we'll do a whole other segment on just some famous Nebraska tornadoes.
Little case study, yep.
But obviously this line right here that kind of goes through southern Lancaster is the Hallam tornado. That was in 2004. Again, F4 tornado hit the village of Hallam. And again, at that time, it was had the record for the widest tornado ever.
Oh, wow, okay. I didn't even know that. 2.5
miles wide.
Wow.
And so that was back in 2004. If you kind of go out towards Grand Island, back in 1980, you had the Night of the Twisters.
Very historical night, yes.
And so there were several strong, violent tornadoes that hit Grand Island back in 1980. If you go up, kind of up toward the northeast, up into the Pilger area.
Yep, that's the one I know the most about.
And again, this was 10 years ago this year in June.
Yes. Wow.
There was the Pilger tornadoes again. There was an outbreak. They had multiple EF4 tornadoes. And I believe that was the last time that Nebraska had tornado-related fatalities.
Okay.
I believe was in 2014.
It is shocking. I mean, I don't say that like, oh my God, this is terrible. Like, this is truly shocking that there were no fatalities on Arbor Day. I mean, you see the pictures of Elkhorn from the surface, from up above, and it's just, I mean, it really is remarkable. I mean, I think it goes to show Nebraskans are very weather savvy. We said that a few times, but I think, living in severe weather season, you're forced to be weather aware. And I don't think people are going to take severe weather season lightly if they ever have after this year again.
And so this graphic right here is from that same map. But this is zoomed in Lancaster County, kind of Lincoln. Again, there's always this sort of common misconception that Lincoln, there's a dome or whatever, there's a bubble, and it doesn't matter what town you live in.
No.
People have some sort of there's a river here, or we're in a valley, and we live in Nebraska. Tornadoes are going to happen, and they're as to why they happen and where they happen. It's just up to Mother Nature. And so Lincoln has been hit by many tornadoes.
Yes.
We thankfully, though, have not had what, we had in April. That happened just on the far northeast side of town.
Right.
And then moved away from town. We've never had sort of a large destructive tornado cut across the Lincoln Metro. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen.
And it can. I mean, I think people have to realize it's a geography thing. It is not a weather-related thing. It is a geography thing.
And so
most of the state is rural.
And if I zoom in even more here, so we can look even more at Lincoln.
I mean, there's been a few.
I mean, obviously recently, this year, April.
Right.
If you go back to 2019, there was an ice cream stand at Pioneers Park. Several tornadoes hit there. 2016, there was one that hit the southeast side of town. My parents could see it from their house. 2017, there was a very brief, small tornado that hit East Campus here right in the middle of town. I remember I was working that day, and there was a severe thunderstorm moving through town. There was no tornado warning on it, but there was a tornado that briefly touched down over there on that big kind of open field where they kind of grow some crops, test some stuff over on East Campus.
Wow.
If you go back, 1971, there was one that hit the southwest part of town. Early 1990s, back in the early 80s, there were some tornadoes that cut across the northern part of town. So, it's happened. And it's going to continue to happen as we move forward. But that's kind of the tornadoes that have moved through Lincoln and Lancaster County. If I punch up Carmelo, and we'll kind of finish on this.
Okay.
But these are the confirmed tornado tracks from so far this year.
Okay.
So this is the damage assessment toolkit that the National Weather Service provides. So we can see these are all the tornado tracks that we can see so far this year nationally. So again, if you zoom in over here, sort of on the eastern part of town, you can see the tornado in northeast Lincoln from Arbor Day, and that cluster then that goes up into Omaha and up towards Blair. You can also see more recently this little green line down here in the southwest side of town. That was the tornado that was along Rokeby Road. So
yes.
Again, it was close by. But if we zoom out and look at a more of a wider view, again, the red lines are your EF4 tornadoes. And so it looks like, just a quick glance here, there's only been three of them, I think, so far this year across the entire country.
One in Iowa, looks like, one in Oklahoma, maybe one in Texas.
Looks like, 2 in Texas, 1 in Iowa, and the one in Iowa was the Greenfield tornado.
Yes.
Which was very violent, again, rated an EF4, but they had estimated winds of over 300 miles an hour with that tornado. It's just several hundred feet off the ground. So again, but a very busy season, not just here, but many, many other places. Again, especially, I'd say, for central and eastern Nebraska. I feel like for western Nebraska, it's been pretty quiet when it comes to tornadoes.
Which is good. And I mean, go back to what you said about, it can't happen here. Bill, I'm from Chicago, and it was I think it was 2 weeks ago. I mean, they had 10 on the ground simultaneously in Chicagoland, and that's unheard of in terms of the number at the same time. But things happen. I mean, this is a video we have showed many kids, and this might be the craziest thing.
And I guess maybe we'll end on this because we've been going on for close to 40 minutes now. But this is the dash cam footage from the Garner Industries tornado, which again is just pretty incredible. And in Nebraska and really anywhere in the Midwest, anytime there's tornadoes, anytime there's severe weather, people want to go outside and pick them up.
They do.
It's human nature. I get it. I'm guilty of it myself.
Absolutely, me too. Not even going to try and lie about that.
But whether it's me, whether it's Carmelo, or Ken, or Brad, or whoever else it might be, when we're covering severe weather and there's a tornado warning and we tell folks, hey, you need to move to your safe place. One of the reasons why we want you to do that and not try and go be a looky-loo is because these things can move incredibly fast and they can move. I wish I could tell everyone that every single tornado is going to have a tornado warning on it and that there's going to be 10 or 15 minutes heads up, but that's not always necessarily the case. Again, with this video in particular, the Garner Industries building, again, they had a good heads up. They were able to move people to a reinforced area. Yes. And that's why that limited the amount of injuries that did happen. But you're not always going to get that 10 or 15 minute heads up.
Look how quick this video was. It's 30, 45 seconds maybe?
Yeah, and that tornado moves across. And
that's over. But, look how fast that was.
Yeah. So when we tell you to move to your safe place, we would like you to move to your safe place as quickly as you can. Again, but I totally understand wanting to try and see it. Again, like I said, I'm guilty of it. I know most people are, but these things can move incredibly fast, and we want you to be safe. So we probably went a little bit long today, but tornadoes is a pretty easy topic to kind of talk for a long time about.
Yeah.
But again, like I mentioned at the top, we're going to try and do this once a week, different
Yes.
topics, whether it be severe weather as we get into the winter time.
We'll switch to those kind of topics,
you know,
right? Probably won't be talking about tornadoes in December unless there's, something that happens like a
You
few
never
years
know.
ago. You never know what's going to happen.
But diving into snowfall forecasting, and then obviously there's always something going on when it comes to the weather. Especially nationally, we're into hurricane season right now, so
Yes.
we'll probably talk about hurricanes at some point. We had the Northern Lights a couple months back. We can kind of dive into some of the science and some of the things behind that. So hope everyone tunes in and kind of follows along. Also, these videos will again live on our YouTube channel. So if you're ever interested, again, if maybe you're a teacher, if you know someone who's a teacher and they want a little bit of information, they can hopefully show the kids, maybe in the classroom. Hopefully, this will be a good resource for those people as well. But just trying to trying
be informative,
inform the public. Again, that's really half the battle in anything, is just kind of getting the information out there.
No, and we're doing our newscasts. We have time. We have 3-4 minutes at a time to explain what's happening in the moment, what's happening in the week ahead. But this is an outlet that we can use to go a little bit deeper into the topic. And I probably could talk about this for about 3 more hours, but we probably should let you all go.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we'll have a fun one next week. I think we should start teasing what we'll have for the following week. We'll have to think about it for this one, I think, because we haven't talked about it. But I think we'll start teasing what our next topic will be at the end of the current episode.
All right. Well, I think we should do Nebraska tornadoes again.
Okay, I'm fine with that. A little case study.
Yeah.
Now, I need to learn more about Night of the Twisters. I've heard so much. I probably need to watch that.
Well, there's a lot of them, because you go back. There's the Easter tornado that hit Omaha. There's been some big tornadoes that have gone through Omaha.
Yes.
And again, obviously, we already talked about a couple of them, but we'll dive in. I think maybe we'll do that next week.
Okay, that sounds like a plan.
Lots of stuff to talk about. So appreciate everyone for tuning in, watching sort of the first Weather Academy here. As always, keep it tuned to 1011, both on air and online, for all of your latest forecast information, as well as all of your latest news and sports.